What should my kid pack for college?
I don't know.
How much spending money?
I don't know.
What should we talk about?
I don't know.
So how can I be sure that my kid is keeping up with his classwork?
I don't know. What are we going to do if there are no in-person classes? I don't know.
College Ready 2020, a crash course preparing college parents for the road ahead. Hello, I'm Andrea McCarren, your host for College Ready 2020. College is a time of major financial transitions for both students and their parents. For students, the beginning of college is often the beginning of their transition to financial independence from their parents. For parents, given the high cost of post-secondary education in America, funding their children's college degree most likely represents one of the greatest financial challenges of their lives. In this episode, we explore the ways that parents and children can work together to make this time of financial transition as stress-free as possible. To help us understand the nuances and complexities of this issue, we spoke with Dr. Betsy Chapman.
I am Dr. Betsy Chapman,
Executive Director of Family Communications at Wake Forest University.
I have the privilege of being able to help parents and families stay connected to life at the university through lots of different types of communications.
And Justin Inscoe,
My name is Justin Inscoe.
who is an Associate Director of New Student and Family Programs at UNC Chapel Hill.
I work with coordinating the family programming events throughout the academic year, and I manage and coordinate the communications for parents and families of college students throughout their time at UNC.
To begin, we asked our guests to tell us about the money-related questions that they most frequently receive from parents.
When it comes to money, it's very much so about the logistics of it. How does my student go about paying for things on and off campus? Is it best for them to have a debit card, credit card, ATM card? What banks or ATMs exist in or near campus? What does their ID or One Card do? Is that something that I can help manage for them to buy, purchase food, printing, other services on or near campus? What role does the cashier and the Office of Scholarships and Student Aid play in working through finances that are related to paying for tuition, room and board fees, etc.? How can I, as a parent or family member, interact with those professionals to see bills, to receive bills, and communications around it? Given FERPA, how do I get more information about what my students are experiencing and support them?
One of the first is always tuition. How do I pay it? How do I know when it's billed? And how can I make sure that the bill comes to me in addition to my student because of FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, that requires billing going to the students? I get questions about, do I have to complete a financial aid application every year? How can I know how much money my student has spent from their meal plan or on their One Card balance? How much should I budget for textbooks? And if my student chooses to join a Greek organization, what kind of cost is that? I also get some questions sometimes about just generally how much money should a student have for a semester, and whether it's a good thing for a parent or family member just to give a student a credit card and let the parent or family member pay off the balance, or how much of that should be the student's responsibility.
Of course, the cost of a college education goes beyond just tuition, room, and board. Student life and activities outside of the classroom are an important part of the college experience and can also represent a significant expense. We asked our guests to discuss how much a family should budget for these additional costs.
When parents think about how much money they should give their student beyond what they need for room and board, there are as many answers to that, honestly, as there are different family constellations. So some of the questions that they might want to ask themselves are, does my student plan to eat most of their meals on campus? If so, that would require less money for them to go to the grocery store or go out to eat. Do I imagine my student wanting to have an active social life that might require buying sporting equipment for clubs or intramurals or getting involved in a Greek organization? So there's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all answer for that, but Instead, what I would encourage families to do is start having those conversations about how often will they eat on or off campus? How often do they imagine wanting to go to the movies? Look around on their institution's website and see some of the ways that they may want or need to have money, and then look at that as a week by week thing and break it down that way.
I think it's a practice in budgeting. What is the family willing to share based on what they've researched in terms of funding or income for a student? What type of refunds might they be getting from loans and how they want to decide as a family to best manage those? And maybe is there opportunity for jobs on campus or employment on or near campus that might help support that income? At many institutions, there are certainly tons of student organizations that require some sort of dues. And as much as we as professionals want students to have that great co-curricular experience, many times it does require some fee to help with travel or help with expenses or for meetings, et cetera. And those are things that are really help fill out the college experience, but can take some funding. It's a pretty nebulous answer in terms of a finite amount, but it is something that can be learned, can be researched, and can be decided on by the student and their family.
Simply knowing the importance of extracurricular and social activities doesn't make it any easier to budget for them. However, there are certain rough benchmarks you can use when estimating these expenses.
Probably something like $2,500 might be a low in terms of all the toiletries, personal travel, entertainment, all the little things that add up over time. And I think for out-of-state students, depending on where they're coming from, the travel, so I would say somewhere around $3,500 might be something they might budget, which sounds like a lot, but it adds up quickly.
This is so hard because you're asking for a quick answer to a very complicated question. Easily, students could spend over the course of an academic year $2,000 or $3,000 or maybe even more. I guess I would temper that by saying it depends in part on what they're doing. If you are running with a crowd of friends that always wants to eat off campus Friday night and Saturday night, or you want to go to the local watering hole once you're 21 and indulge in some social activities there, or you want to have a great tailgate every weekend when there's a football game, all of those tiny things for food and beverage can add up. There's also a number of great things like date functions that may happen either as a part of a club or organization that you're in or something your residence hall is doing. College students love road trips. I want to go visit my friend at some other school down the road, and that's gas money and food money and all of those things. So depending on how active your student wants to be, that can really impact your bank account.
During their transition to collegiate life, students learn to use the basic tools they will need to achieve their financial independence. We discuss these tools with our guests and ask them about best practices for setting up student checking accounts and getting credit cards.
Families should be looking at their institutions, resources, what ATMs, banks are in the area. At our institution, we have mainly in-state folks that come, so they are familiar with a lot of the banking institutions that are nearby. But with lots of international and out-of-state students, they're thinking about how they can create new accounts and get a debit card for access to funds. Families sometimes have joint accounts with their students so they can easily access, view what's being transacted, and also help share or send money as needed. For our student leaders, we have a financial literacy component of their annual development series, because for a lot of students, that's the first time they're really diving into personal finance. In the past, I would caution students about a credit card. I think there are a lot of spaces where companies would want students to sign up for a credit card and kind of pull them in and get them in a space where maybe they weren't ready to use credit in a responsible way. But I think families and students can have a great conversation around getting a credit card. Maybe it's their first credit card and building credit early, and that would certainly set them up well for their time in college and afterward.
I do think it's very important for students to have some skin in the game in financial matters. when they have some ownership and some responsibility, they tend, first of all, to learn more about how to be financially literate, which is a skill they'll need for the rest of their lives. But also, there's still kind of a safety net there where their parents or family members can have some involvement just to make sure things don't go sideways. For example, you don't want to find out your student has run up $2,000 worth of credit card bills that you had no idea about. So it's a delicate balance for families to decide how exactly to do that. It's very important for college students to have an ATM card, ideally if there is an ATM branch, bank branch on campus, so that they could quickly get to some funds if they needed to. It's just always nice to know that if you had an emergency where you needed some cash, you wouldn't necessarily have to drive someplace to do that. I have seen a number of families and students for whom they set up a joint credit card account, or it could be a debit. It could be just a checking account where a student has an ATM card where mom or dad or the family members put a certain amount of money in every month and they leave that for their student to spend as they see fit. And that could be a really good working model for many people. It wouldn't necessarily benefit the student if they had a credit card and carte blanche that they don't have to ever worry about paying it off themselves. Their parents will take care of the bill every month or some family member. Because I think it's important for students to see when their balance is declining. And then that's how you make important decisions about, do I go out to dinner off campus this week, or do I say, wow, I'm not getting paid, if you will, until the start of the next month and I need to save that money. There's some balance that can be struck so that students have some freedom, but also still a safety net financially where they haven't made a big mistake. And that sort of monthly payment, if you will, where your family members deposit into your account and that's what you have to spend for the month, is a good way to help students learn budgeting. One other thought is that with the advent of Uber and Lyft and ride sharing, there are a number of college students at campuses nationwide that look to those services as safe ways to get home if they have been out at a party. And so some parents and family members have said, charge all of the Ubers you need. I just want to make sure that you're not getting in the car with someone who has been drinking. And I do think that there could be some important conversations to be had within a family about how to handle things like safe transportation to places, just so students know that they could charge that if they needed to.
The college billing process can be an eye-opening experience for both students and their families. Colleges treat their students as adults, and as such, they send tuition bills directly to students, even though the parents are frequently the ones paying them. We asked our guests to give us more details on the ins and outs of billing for college tuition, room, and board.
Many schools, because of FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, will automatically send the bills to the student, even though the parent or family member may be the one paying tuition. So it's important to look at your individual school's website, to look at the financial services portion of the website to see what the process is for students to grant access to their parent or family member as what is called, at least at my school, a third-party payer. And that is typically something, at least at my institution, where the student has to grant that access to the parent or family member. The institution cannot do that for them. So the first conversation would be with your student to say, hey, I want to have access to tuition so I can pay your bills. And then you find the appropriate resources on your website so that the student can do that. I cannot overstate the importance of having that third-party payer, a parent or family member, being able to see when those tuition bills are due or other major financial messages. And the reason is, at many schools, if you as a student have unpaid tuition or unpaid fees, it could block you from very important things like registering for class or being able to attend class. And I have seen students who had not authorized their family members miss being able to register because they then have to wait a day to get a tuition payment processed. Those are easily avoidable errors. So it's to both the student and the family member's benefit to have everyone on the same page for the vast majority of families. I know there's always an exception. It's important for families to know, sort of on the topic of financial aid, that if you've applied for financial aid in your student's first year, typically those financial aid forms, or FAFSAs, have to be repeated every year so that your financial aid can be recalculated. You want to make sure that you always have on your calendar as a parent or family member, make sure to do the FAFSA every year and make sure you're complying with whatever forms you need to be considered for financial aid for the next year. And on the student side, be aware that sometimes your financial aid or scholarship package could have a GPA requirement, and you want to make sure that you are coloring within the lines and getting the grades that you need to ensure that you can continue with that financial aid.
With all the complexities of the college billing process, one simple question is, how can parents make sure their college bills get paid?
With our cashier's office at UNC Chapel Hill, and likely in other places, there are ways that you can sign a waiver or grant access for a family member, a trusted family member, to access the account, be able to discuss it with a cashier's office professional, or even make payments online and view all those charges. For UNC Chapel Hill, it's called adding a proxy or an authorized user. And traditionally, that means at any time a student can go into their hub, their technology hub, and they can actually designate a person, and that person can create a PIN or a way to sign in easily and manage those things. I couldn't impress more the need to follow the academic or registrar's calendar, because as those dates come up, families may not get an email about it, even though they have access to view it, but students will. So being able to follow those dates and know when those things are coming up is important.
Given the high cost of a college education, financial aid is often a critical piece of the financial puzzle students and families must solve. As with many other aspects of college life, the key to success with financial aid is maintaining close contact with the school financial aid department and keeping close watch on the specific requirements of each student's financial aid package.
In terms of the Office of Scholarships and Student Aid or financial aid, I think it does begin with kind of the springtime. So before the start of the academic year anyway, that's typically when you're going to find the FAFSA due, and when folks have to do that each year to report what funds or what the expected family contribution is and how there might be grants or aid. Families need to be watching the registrar calendar at their university's website. That's where you're going to see a lot of those important dates about resubmitting the FAFSA, when does student aid award to students' accounts, when does cancellation, drop, or withdrawal from certain classes happen, because certainly aid is sometimes dependent on GPA. It can be dependent on how many hours a student has. You may have to maintain a minimum there to keep certain aid. I would encourage families to have their students make an appointment with their financial aid counselor or someone that can help walk them through some of these important dates and forms to make sure they're really accessing a lot of the aid in which they're eligible for.
It doesn't matter whether your student is an incoming freshman or a graduating senior, and it doesn't matter whether they'll be taking classes from their bedroom at home or you'll be driving them hundreds of miles away. Before classes begin this year, you need to speak to your student about money.
It is hard for parents to talk to their kids about personal finance, but you have to do it. It is critical.
That's Jamie Gayton, Executive Vice President of the Pentagon Federal Credit Union, PenFed, who served for 30 years in the U.S. Army after graduating from West Point. He's the author of the Guide to Personal Financial Planning for the Armed Forces and has taught financial literacy courses for the cadets at West Point, family readiness groups throughout the Army, and a variety of other groups and community organizations. Jamie is also the father of 2 teenagers and a young adult. One financial subject that may not be obvious is booking travel. For this episode of College Ready Money Moments, Jamie tells us why.
Before students get into the car, they need to learn how to book travel. And I think this is incumbent upon the parents to spend some time with their children. Parents have probably booked travel multiple times, and they have figured out what they think to be the best method to do that. But a student, when they get to college, if they're booking their own travel either to come home or to go on vacation somewhere else to spring break, they don't know what to do necessarily unless you've both talked to them about it and then walked them through it. And it's not hard, but the fact is, until they've done it a couple of times, they're going to spend quite a bit of time and quite a bit of money doing it. My nephew was booking flights to go home for spring break, and when I talked to him, he told me that it was almost $800 to book a round-trip flight to Florida. And I almost fell out of my chair. And I said, has anybody ever walked you through this? And the answer was no. So he literally went onto a site, and he booked the first flight that he saw. Probably didn't check multiple airports, probably didn't check on multiple days. And because of that, he ended up paying significantly more than he needed to. So just teaching them sort of the comparison shopping in multiple airports and multiple days allows the students then to sort of take control of this and then help manage their finances in a better way.
PenFed Credit Union serves over 2 million members worldwide, offering market-leading certificates, checking, credit cards, personal loans, mortgages, auto loans, and student loans, with members' interests always in mind. For more information concerning the personal financial challenges faced by college students, please visit PenFed at penfed.org.
Living on a budget is difficult for everyone, and for many students, it represents a completely new challenge. It's important to speak with your student about the necessary trade-offs, which are the key to staying on budget. Understanding these trade-offs and the consequences of getting off track ultimately lead to financial maturity.
This is where it's really important to think about how your specific child, how responsible they are, and what you think you can reasonably trust them with. There are two potential models that families could use. One could say, for argument's sake, I'm going to put $1,000 in your checking account, and you have that to get you through the fall semester. The opposite way would be, I'm going to put $200 in every month, and that's what you have to spend. So some of it comes from knowing your student and thinking about how responsible they were in high school. Maybe they've had a job in high school and thinking about how they've spent their money. I think it's certainly easier to put them on an allowance, if you will, if you have a concern where you're allocating money to them monthly, and then you don't have an unhappy surprise that 1 month in they say, I've spent my whole $1,000, I need to have more money. Another important part to that conversation, and this is something that as a parent myself I struggle with, is letting my student live with consequences of their decisions. So if your student had $200 to spend in a month and they spent it all by the 15th of the month, the inclination might be for some families to say, that's okay, I'll put some more in. That may or may not actually teach your student a valuable lesson about budgeting, because if they get rescued, they haven't really learned from a painful consequence. But if you say, gosh, honey, that's really too bad that it's October 15th and you're not getting paid again for another 2 weeks, you'll have to find a way to make it. Whether that means they are only going to eat on campus or they're not going to go out to movies or bars or other events. But sometimes letting those students live with the consequences of their actions. And again, this is a mild thing. I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't have your student eat, but not letting them get rescued if they have behaved in a way that splurged on all their money right away. Start thinking about those things over the summer and have some of those conversations to say, here's how I would handle it. So your student might know, gosh, if I take all my money and spend it in the first half of each month, my family members are not going to send any more. Sometimes knowing those things up front can help shape and model behavior.
Our nation's current economic challenges have put a financial strain on the families of many college students. Indeed, many families are facing significantly changed financial circumstances since the time they received their current financial aid package. The financial aid departments at America's colleges and universities are excellent resources, but open and transparent communication is essential in order for them to assist families in need. We asked our guests to discuss the steps parents should take if their financial position has changed to the degree that it jeopardizes their ability to afford their children's college education.
As a person who supports families and how they work with their students for this experience, I'm going to have them personally refer to folks in the Office of Scholarships and Student Aid as the trusted professionals to help them with that. I do know that this is a national conversation, right? If people have filled out the FAFSA, they're probably reporting their income from maybe 2 years ago. So even if they lost a job this past year, there can be an extreme impact to the aid that they're receiving or not receiving. At minimum, I would work with families to connect them with those professionals to see what's happening at a larger level to support folks during this, I hate to say it, but unprecedented time.
One of the many unfortunate realities of COVID and living with this pandemic is that a lot of people who filled out their FAFSA form last year or the year before are suddenly finding themselves in very different financial circumstances. My best advice to parents and families and students would be initiate those conversations with your financial aid office. talk to them about, is there emergency aid, whether that is from the institution proper or from the CARES Act. Your state could have had its own pool of money to assist with emergency grants. So have those conversations and be very honest and transparent. My sense is that most financial aid offices want to work with their students and families to make a workable solution for their students.
The current coronavirus pandemic is top of mind for all of us, and it will have a deep impact on student life, including student spending. Due to the constantly changing nature of the pandemic, it's difficult to say exactly what its impact on spending will be, but our guests were able to identify some specific types of expenses which will be affected.
Two things. One is we might find that a lot of these indirect costs of attending, a place like UNC Chapel Hill might be much lower. If we're knocking off $2,000 to $3,000, depending on what folks want to do outside of their tuition, books, etc., that's significant savings for a student and a family member. The cost, however, some would argue, is certainly you're missing out on an on-campus experience and the development that happens personally, the direct connection to professional staff, to faculty, to lecturers, to the resources that are present. So I think it could be a little bit less expensive for families.
Expenses will change relative to COVID on a couple of fronts. One is the extracurricular funds, if you will. Things that students had routinely done in non-COVID years. We're going to have a mountain weekend or a beach weekend, or we're going to spend a week at the beach between finals and commencement, which had been something, particularly in North Carolina, has been something of a tradition. As the need for social distancing has increased, some of those things may not be possible in the same way that they had before. Organizations may not be willing to host large social gatherings that would have required something like every member of a fraternity or a sorority, for example, to chip in to rent a hotel ballroom for a big function that they're doing. So some of that could go down. There is the possibility that parents and families will want to have some contingency planning just in case there is a large-scale COVID situation in the fall. Do I have disposable cash to get my student home, whether that's a plane ticket or gas money to get them home? Do I get a storage unit to put their things in over the summer, or if they had to make a quick departure? There are those kinds of things that are in the back of many families' minds. From an institutional perspective, I think most colleges right now are probably wrestling with the notion of tuition as it relates to students who are not able to return to campus for whatever reason. Do we charge the exact same amount for the learning that would take place virtually as we would in the classroom? And I think that's a big question. The other question is with de-densification of campus. There's a lot of campuses who say we cannot have the full complement of our students on campus living in the residence halls. How do we still provide for our housing guarantee? Does that mean we rent local apartments or local hotels? Or do we decide to tell a certain number of students that they cannot come back? And those will have some financial ramifications. And I think, frankly, schools right now are grappling with all those issues.
Without question, then, there will be unexpected costs which arise from the coronavirus pandemic. Given this uncertainty, it is critical that every family include an emergency fund in their college financial planning.
It could be the case that as things continue to reopen, there's a dance between what we're seeing in terms of positive cases and the impact to students or our communities where our colleges are. I think it would be helpful for families to think about a small emergency fund. I think that travel piece is probably the most important. Some institutions are thinking about how they help students quarantine and relying on campus researchers who are epidemiologists. I think many institutions might be looking at, do they take certain residence halls or properties on campus? And, if you've been exposed, that's where you can quarantine for a little while. And if you have tested positive, here's where you have an option to live comfortably, to continue to work and do class remotely, but still on campus while you recover. Some institutions have emergency funds where if there's something that's happened with a student or several students, they're able to help cover some of those things. But given that this is a worldwide pandemic, I'm not sure how much those emergency funds will scale if there's a larger outbreak.
It can be difficult to know where to begin when having student-parent conversations about budgeting and spending for college. There are certain practical matters which should be a part of your money conversations and can help you open up a dialogue.
The most important money conversation that families need to have before they drop their students off this fall is the issue of signing over that proxy access or third-party payers so that families have access to be able to view the tuition bill online and pay that. If you don't do anything else, that's the one that you have to do. The second thing I would recommend is for many families, we have not necessarily forced our children to do budgeting and planning and even shopping. So sometimes they don't have realistic expectations of what it costs to run a household, even if that's just a household of one. So my encouragement to parents and families at Wake Forest is to tell your student, think about all the things that you think you need to have for the first year and make yourself a list and figure out what it's going to cost and then go and buy those things. And you could decide how much money you have to spend on those things. So it may come down to, if for argument's sake you say, I'm going to give you $300 to outfit your room, that means you don't take a bedspread that's $200 because it would leave you so little for the rest of your needs. I think it's important to have them do some things like do a couple weeks of the family's grocery shopping, planning out for how much food do we eat and what does that cost? And then they can scale that back and think about how that would look in their lives. How often will I need to replace things like shampoo and deodorant and toiletries and other things, to give them some real world experience doing that before we drop them off at school, if mom, dad, or a loved one has always done all of that grocery shopping and planning for them.
The financial planning relationship between student, parent, and university is just like any other relationship. It functions best when there is clear and open communication among all the stakeholders. Establishing these open lines of communication, then, should be a parent's number one priority before the beginning of the school year.
Have you had an explicit conversation with your student about what your expectations are relative to college and, in this sense, finances, versus what their expectations are? Loved ones and family members and supporters think that their students know what their expectations are when those might be a bit murky. Families may think, I hope my student gets an A, maybe a couple Bs and a C. Maybe that would feel acceptable. Whereas their student might be worrying that, I think my parents are going to expect me to have straight A's. With everything, whether it's finances or budgeting or grades or even things that seem as trivial as how often do you want to be able to communicate, have some of those conversations prior to the start of school so that you as the parent or family member can say, here's what I'm hoping for about money and budgeting. And your student can say, here's what I was thinking. And it may be that there's some negotiation that has to take place within and each side give and take a little bit. But I think the more you communicate some of those expectations and come together for what feels like comfortable family norms for your family, that way everyone's on the same page and there's no one who isn't clear about what the hope is. As a second thing is, what is my role as a parent or loved one of a college student? Many of us, while our kids are in high school or younger, have had a very active role directing and providing answers of what they want their students to do and how to do them. As your student gets to college, part of their developmental process is to figure out those things for themselves. So as parents or family members move out of the directing of how to do things and move into more of the reflecting questions mode of helping their student learn. So if their student is saying, gosh, I just found out I had an unexpected $100 fee, the answer that you could give is, go to the cashier and give them a check and do this. And that would accomplish the task, but it doesn't necessarily help your student learn how to take care of that by themselves. So instead, we encourage families to ask questions like, gosh, sounds like that's something you need to take care of. What have you thought of? How might you approach this? Which offices on campus might be able to steer you in the right direction? So you subtly help your student learn to seek the answers themselves instead of look to you for the answers.
Clearly, financial matters are a critical dimension of the parent-student relationship during college. No matter how challenging and uncomfortable it may be, you must begin speaking about budgeting and spending expectations now, and continue having regular, scheduled financial conversations throughout the school year. So parents, there's lots to do to get ready for the fall. If you have not already done so, please identify the Parent and Family Relations Administrators at your student's college or university as soon as possible, and contact those individuals so that you've established an open line of communication prior to the start of classes. Also, many colleges and universities now have Facebook groups and email lists for parents. If that includes your student's school, definitely sign up and participate so that you can benefit from the wealth of information and experiences shared by other parents. I'm Andrea McCarren. Enjoy your summer, and please join us again for the next episode of College Ready 2020. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe to College Ready 2020 wherever you get your podcasts so that you'll receive future episodes. And please also leave us a review to help others find the show too. For parents of college students, additional guidance can be found at collegeready.guide. This show was created in cooperation with the Association of Higher Education Parent-Family Program Professionals, or AHEPPP. College Ready 2020 is a production of Wise Action.
Audiation.